No one would have believed, in the last years of the 19th century, that human affairs would be watched from the timeless worlds of space. No one could have dreamed that we were being scrutinized, as someone with a microscope studies creatures that swarm and multiply in a drop of water. Few men have even considered the possibility of life on other planets. And yet, across the gulf of space, minds immeasurably superior to ours regarded this Earth with envious eyes, and slowly and surely they drew their plans against us. Dr. Hans Utter, welcome back to the Gnostic Media podcast for your ninth time and eighth in a row, plus the 5 radio shows we did. And this one isn't on music, mind control, and psychobiology. We're actually going to be doing a show today on The War of the Worlds, written by H.G. Wells. And what we're going to be discussing today is the October 30th, 1938 broadcast of Orson Welles' version of War of the Worlds, which, as Hans and I will be showing, was actually... well, there's a lot more behind this story than has been told previously since 1938, and we're timing this for release on October 30th or 31st, 2015. But anyway, we've got a lot of good material here. I actually went to Princeton University and pulled documents on the War of the Worlds, and I also went to Grover's Mill, New Jersey, and visited the location, got photographs of everything, which we'll be showing on screen during this show. So anyway, Hans, welcome back to the Gnostic Media podcast.
Yeah, it's good to be here, Jan. It's good to continue chipping away at the mass illusion that we inhabit, and hopefully start to make ways for people to figure out what's going on and pull themselves together and pull out of it. So.
All right. Well, there's a lot to go over in this episode, including the connections that I made while I was there. And I've got video of a park that they dedicated, which was right down the street from the so-called alien invasion. I actually went to the park and took video of the whole thing, but 50 years after this event, they dedicated a park to it. And essentially what War of the Worlds is their prototype for panic. And it has become the foundation for how media is manipulated to alter the public's perception of reality, essentially. This was really their foundational study. And as Hans and I go through all of this material, we're going to also play the original War of the Worlds broadcast in its entirety, which is about 57 minutes or thereabout of audio there. But and during that, we'll pause the audio and we'll have discussions about what's going on, as well as interspersing primary documents and photographs of everything on screen in between. So, anyway, Hans, where would you like to begin?
Well, I guess I'd like to begin with the fact that the War of the Worlds, how many media events are remembered past their quote-unquote sell-by date that don't have a larger social connection. Okay, of course, everyone remembers Elvis on the Ed Sullivan Show, or you look at the Beatles landing in America, etc., or assassination of JFK. But these are events that have much wider social, psychological context. Another example is the riots after Stravinsky's Rite of Spring. That's an example, but that's something that a musicologist might be aware of that. But how many events, especially radio broadcasts, are remembered at all that were fictional? And in fact, how many are brought up over and over and over again? And how many have very large and expensive public parks dedicated to them that are generally unknown?
And not only that, but a TV show was made of War of the Worlds in the 1980s with the guy that played the father in Happy Days. And we have last year a film being produced by Derek Cole that was released on May 14, 2014, Orson Welles War of the Worlds. I heard nothing about that. I'll have to see if I can track that down and see that as well. And you have what's key for people to understand regarding the War of the Worlds is War of the Worlds wasn't just this Hallows Eve event in 1938. War of the Worlds didn't apparently, from what I've been able to discover, is that the effect on society that is claimed about War of the Worlds is part of the propaganda about War of the Worlds. In other words, 1 million people apparently didn't actually freak out. Maybe, a few, several hundred, several thousands did, something like that. But apparently the advertising of War of the Worlds having this major impact is part of the psychological operation that is the War of the Worlds, and why they keep rolling it out, why it's so important to them. And, I also want to say that, like every episode on mind control and all of this, without exception, War of the Worlds ties directly to the Huxleys. Of course, H.G. Wells, who wrote the book The War of the Worlds, was Thomas Henry Huxley's student. Orson Welles, who did the radio version of War of the Worlds, also did a film with Aldous Huxley. And, of course, H.G. Wells is who came up with the term New World Order, and then Aldous Huxley had the Brave New World, and both of these are key to what has become and what is the Brave New World, what we're seeing right now, looking all around us, all of the dumbing down of society and all of this. This is Aldous Huxley's blueprint for society that he wrote and provided the government and the psychopathic control freaks, that he provided them in Brave New World Revisited, in all of his books, except for maybe his Eyesight book and a couple others. Most of his books are based on how to control the population. And at Princeton's Mud Library, I found a book that Aldous Huxley had written titled Enemies of Freedom that was never published, that breaks down essentially, it's another warning of how all of this stuff could happen. But again, when you understand Aldous Huxley and the Huxley family's role in all of this, it's yet another blueprint. And it was actually found at the same library where the CFR archives were stored and where the Princeton Radio Research Project archives were stored, the Princeton's Mud Library. And, of course, the Council on Foreign Relations is the public relations group, council, whatever you want to call it, for their global public relations scheming. So anyway, just a little background on all of this, but I just wanted to make clear that, War of the Worlds was not just this one broadcast in 1938 that seems so distant and unrelated to us. It's, in fact, everything that came after the radio project or the broadcast, and it is, in fact, all of the media and how they use media for psychological control today.
Yeah, certainly. And there's a nexus between psychologists, between military intelligence, between business. The business side is very important. Advertising, between educational systems. All these things are intertwined. And in a sense, they're kind of picking and choosing a variety of theories. And these are high-level projects that involve people from many different fields that are working together. So we're looking at think tanks. And a lot of the people involved in the radio research project, like Stanton, became vice president or president of CBS, was very much involved in the commercial side of things. Someone like Adorno was...
wait, just before you go on to Adorno there, I should mention that Frank Stanton, I did find some really excellent letters between him and his handlers at Princeton. One of his handlers, and I'm forgetting his name right now, but I'll quote it on screen here, but one of his handlers was even telling Frank Stanton, who's the president of CBS, that he will be at all of this other guy's meetings, etc. I mean, direct orders telling him what to do. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, and Stanton was... very...
Sorry, that was Max Gordon. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, Stanton was a very important figure in that, he helped shape the modern television landscape starting in 1946. And a lot of these, CBS, you have Walter Cronkite. I mean, we're talking like, of course, we're in the day of hundreds of cable channels. CBS was one of the major loci for people getting knowledge of the world. And he was there through the McCarthy era, et cetera, et cetera. And so he had was extremely influential. But he did have a background in psychology and a background in marketing and statistics. He was with the Office of War Information. He consulted for the Secretary of War, the Department of the Navy. He was part of a secret group that worked for created by President Eisenhower.
The Eisenhower 10 think tank.
Yes, exactly. And also, so you see just in this one individual and his doctoral thesis, which actually was looking up at Ohio State. I'm right here in Columbus, so he's another fine Ohio State graduate. And the name of his thesis was a critique of present methods and a new plan for studying radio listening behavior. And basically what I found with Stanton, even though he's one of the most well-known alumni of Ohio State, I mean, he's a very famous graduate, none of the books were on the shelves. You could not find, there were some in the stacks. A lot of them were in the law library. A lot of them were really buried. So, and even to find his work was quite difficult, but he was certainly very much involved again in the governmental and legislative side of things. And, in the War of the Worlds, not only, I think all of us have heard over and over about the mass panic and how the media can induce panic. But at the same time, when you look at later research saying that this panic didn't really happen, this is also, again, you see the revelation of the method, right? Where you're showing people, hey, we're doing this stuff. These are fake psychological operations. Even the panics may be fake that are induced, but we're going to tell you that, and you're just going to accept that. And as soon as you do that, it's almost like a hypnotic command.
Right.
And that's how, and it works through, alchemy, black magic, or psychological operations. When the person willingly acquiesces to the mind control, then that mind control asserts a far greater degree of power.
And also I should mention that War of the Worlds is apparently a key factor in the intelligence community's launch of so-called aliens and UFOs and alien invasions and alien abductions and all of the stuff, such as what I exposed in my article Spies in Academic Clothing. Even John G. Fuller talks about Orson Welles and his work on MKUltra. Now, interestingly, Carl Baraghi, who's the son of the famous archaeologist Stephen Baraghi, yesterday he sent me a cover of a October 1957 magazine that I had never seen before, and I thought I had read all of the 1957 magazines on this, but across the top it says Special Quest for the Sacred Mushroom, but this is from Fate magazine, and it's all about the promotion of UFOs. So here we have this nexus between the UFO community again and the promotion of the psychedelics being promoted in Fate magazine October 1957. And it says Italian, I think it is, part of it's missing. I think that is what it says, though. Italian flying saucer. I do have another copy of the cover. Yes, that is what it says. So, we see again them blending, if there's any separation at all, the work with MKUltra, such as with John G. Fuller. He did the 15-year follow-up study on Pont Saint-Esprit in France. And he also is the same guy who popularized Betty and Barney Hill, and he's the one that did all of the early UFO promotions. So in book form and on television for CBS.
And just to add a little bit more to that, you look at Carl Jung, and we'll get a bit more into the archetypal use of archetypes, collective unconscious, collective social mechanisms. Jung researched both what he described as the rise of fascism in Germany and how this worked on archetypal energies to create mass movements, mass psychosis, as well as UFOs. So Jung's idea, the psychosocial hypothesis on UFOs, and Jung wrote about flying saucers.
I have that book, Jung's book, Flying Saucers.
Yeah, and so the idea is that, in a sense, I think it's important to take into account two important sort of concepts, and this is maybe a little bit far field, but this idea, you may be familiar with the bicameral mind, right? Julian Jaynes' book, a theory that basically in the Roman and Greek eras, people had a different mode of perception or consciousness where they would see these sort of archetypal forms, the gods and goddesses, externalized to them. And then if you move later, to the collective unconscious, the fact is that a lot of our lives do take place in our dream state, in a semi-conscious state, and the influence of being able to sort of reach behind the conscious screen of our public personalities and manipulate that subtly, or even just to implant a single image. And I sent you a link for that Water Tower book, right? So you see these images being reimplanted and reimplanted and reimplanted and reimplanted. And what you really have is a process whereby you have public demonstrations, you have invocation of particular linked symbolic reference points that are tied to events, and these events are constantly relived, right? How many important events are just forgotten about, right, in the mass media? Many are forgotten about. But the War of the Worlds, I would say, really is, if you want to see the template for everything from, modern false flag attacks to, the music stuff, music and mind control 1960 stuff, to reality television, to, the conditioning of children through children's media, you can really see War of the Worlds as being the first full-scale rollout of this. And the fact is that they basically said what they're going to do, because again, if people reveal to you what you're doing to your face And even though your unconscious mind is going to, if you had your critical reasoning, even subconsciously, you're going to realize that, hey, we're being manipulated. All this stuff's going on. And the more you discount that, the more you refuse to see what's going on around you, the deeper and deeper you're also repressing the fact that you're aware of that you're controlled. So it serves as kind of like that double bind thing of Bateson that just increases the potentialities. And again, just by the fact that this stuff is constantly rolled out, if we wanted to forget about it, we're not going to forget about it, because we have to keep remembering this very important event, which took place right before World War II, right? And that was, as I think we're going to make a pretty good case for proving, or at least giving a lot of the evidence that would lead to a pretty good hypothesis, that this War of the Worlds was actually planned before the whole research project mechanism was set in place. And that's what makes it especially compelling when you see that level of pre-planning and post-planning, and the implementation, again, of these archetypal images into our background, into our, what's known as a background, as a philosopher, Charles Taylor talks about. The background is the sort of accepted and primarily unconscious world that we inhabit. And when you can inject stuff into that background, which means, again, this is the stuff we take for granted. When you can inject and transform subtly this background and subtext of that, you can have, pretty vast ripple effects. And again, remember, we're dealing primarily with mass psychology here.
Now, one thing that I would like to discuss before we dive into the audio here is, and obviously I want to discuss some of the documents. Oh, and I should mention here that because of copyrights, I'm not allowed to show the photographs I have, which I took about 500 photographs of actual documents at Princeton. I will show many quotes from these letters and documents on screen. In other words, I'll type, I'll type them up and show the quotes on screen, and maybe I can blur out the document in the background or something like that, but I don't want to get sued by Princeton University and blocked out of the libraries for, when we still have at least 30 or 40 more boxes to go through there. But so anyway, I'll do my best to show those quotes and to show as many as I can. Obviously, it's going to be a lot more work than just dropping a photograph of these documents into the video. So there won't be as many, but I'll at least show some of the best ones. But what I also want to talk about is this park in Grover's Mill, New Jersey. Now, Grover's Mill, where all of this took place, is actually only about 10 or 15 minutes from Princeton University, and the official Grover's Mill is still there. The house that they show in the original newspaper articles, which I'll show on screen here, is still there. And I did go up and take photos of the front door of the house and the front of the house and everything. And interestingly, though, the state, this little city or township or whatever, purchased not only Grover's Mill, but the house next door with the water tower. And now it's office buildings, but it's a dedicated landmark. And then down the street several hundred yards, maybe 200 to 300 yards, is Van Est Park. And the Van Est Park was founded in 1962, and it's in the West Windsor Township. But exactly 50 years in October 29th, 1988, they officially dedicated the park to the War of the Worlds. And within the park, as you walk around the park, and I'm going to show a video clip of this park here and just walking around it, but you can see these plaques that they have set up all around the park. And it starts off War of the Worlds broadcast. In 1938, there were no televisions or cell phones. People gathered around their radios for news and entertainment. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, since this is October 30th and 31st, 2015, I want you all to gather around and listen to this episode and everything we're going to be playing here, just like it was October 1938, and you're sitting around the radio getting all of your information. I think, that'll put it in perspective for everybody how they did all of this. But it says America was just coming out of the Great Depression, and Adolf Hitler had recently ascended into power in Germany. We have to bring in the Nazis, right? I mean, no good story begins without the Nazis.
Oh, just an aside. The War of the Worlds script itself, it takes place in 1939. So the War of the Worlds, in the beginning, they talk about 1939. They use the word 1939 in the script, which is weird. Even though it's supposed to be live, in the very beginning of the script, they said the war scare was over in 1939. So just a little aside, that the thing itself was set 1 year later. So, which of course we had the whole World War II thing, which came up, War of the Worlds. So anyways, go ahead.
All right. And so America was just coming out of the Great Depression, and Adolf Hitler had recently ascended into power in Germany. A threat of another world war had Americans on the edge. The War of the Worlds was a science fiction novel by H.G. Wells that was adopted by the Mercury Group on CBS Radio at 8 p.m. on October 30th, 1938. The production was directed and narrated by Orson Welles, who also voiced many of the characters. When Wells and Howard Koch adopted the book for radio play, the script was written and performed so it would sound like a news broadcast about an alien invasion. While the broadcasters made several periodic announcements that the show was a fictional performance, many listeners believed that the events were actually happening. And of course, people turn radios, and then change the dial and stuff. So if you came into the middle of this broadcast, you might actually think it was a real news report. And then going on, walking through the park here, across the top, the plaque says, October 30th broadcast. The broadcast was 1 hour long and consisted of multiple news bulletins, which interrupted Raymond Rockefeller and his orchestra playing smooth jazz. The skit involved on-the-scene reporters and scientific authorities who reported on the events occurring as the Martian capsule landed in Grover's Mill. The Martians attacked and destroyed the New Jersey State Militia, and then they attacked other cities throughout the country, including New York City. The last portion of the broadcast was a monologue by Wells explaining that the Martians had been killed by a pathogen. To end the show, Wells went back to his normal persona and announced that the show was a Halloween joke. And let's see. Grover's Mill, and then quotes from the broadcast. Grover's Mill reporter. Good heavens, something is wriggling out of the shadow like a gray snake. Now it's another one, and another. They look like tentacles to me. There, I can see the thing's body. It's large as a bear, and it glistens like wet leather. But let's face it, ladies and gentlemen, it's indescribable. I can hardly force myself to keep looking at it. The eyes are black and gleam like a serpent. The mouth is V-shaped with saliva dripping from its rimless lips that seem to quiver and pulsate. A Princeton professor describing the Martian's weapon. For want of a better term, I shall refer to the mysterious weapon as a heat ray. It's all too evident that these creatures have scientific knowledge far in advance of our own. A bulletin stated, I have been requested by the governor of New Jersey to place the counties of Mercer and Middlesex as far as West Princeton and east to Jamesburg under martial law. For companies of state militia are proceeding from Trenton and Grover's Mill and will aid in the evacuation of homes within the range of military operations. military operations. And then international reaction. And of course, as I mentioned at the start of this, part of the psychological operation was the promotion of this idea of aftermath and international and public reaction. So here we go. And of course, this was in the New York Times. And of course, they never published any of the statistics on this, and all of this is apparently all public relations and all part of War of the Worlds. But it says, quote, approximately 6 million people are believed to have heard the broadcast, and there have been conflicting ideas about the number of people who actually panicked. Okay, so this is actually admitted at the park dedicated to it. The front page of the New York Times on the following day, okay, so this would be October 31st, 1938, had the story of the broadcast in headline, Radio Listeners in Panic, Taking War Drama as Fact. Okay, so let's get this straight. So, now I used to work for LA Times and the Press Enterprise. Now, they would start printing those newspapers at midnight, 1, 2 a.m. So the broadcast in New Jersey, which is only 2 hours, Grover's Mill is like 2 hours from New York City. So this broadcast ends at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. Then they've set the type for 1938 printers. And then first thing, early, hours before the sun comes up, at 1 or 2 a.m., they've started the presses, and by 5 or 6 a.m., these newspapers are being delivered telling people, radio listeners in a panic, taking war drama as fact. So this is clearly part of the operation, because how the hell would the New York Times know that there was a panic before it had even been reported? Where did they get that information from? Overnight? Back in the 1930s when everybody slept at nighttime? So the story told of responses throughout the country, including thousands of persons called the police, newspapers and radio stations here and in other cities of the United States and Canada seeking advice on protective measures. In Newark, in a single block at Hedden Terrace, more than 20 families rushed out of their houses with wet handkerchiefs and towels over their faces. And all of these reports are, hard to verify. And some of the other news articles about this event bring all of this into question. But in Indianapolis, a woman ran into a church screaming, quote, New York destroyed. It's the end of the world. You might as well go home and die. I just heard it on the radio, end quote. Services were dismissed immediately. Legend has it that locally, some residents opened fire on a water tower, and this water tower is very important because the water tower becomes the alien tripod machine invaders that compose the front covers of H.G. Wells' book, and it's the water tower that is still there, next door, about 100 feet from the Grover's Mill, from the Red Mill building, about 100 feet, maybe 110 feet from that, is this old water tower. And, so this water tower, they claim, the people thought somehow that this water tower that they would have lived next to for years was suddenly this alien machine, and they opened fire on it. And I've read other claims that they apparently shot the top off of the water tower. But anyway, so apparently the neighbors and most of the neighborhood wasn't there in 1938 that's there today. So, we're talking maybe 1/10 of the neighbors then as now who wouldn't know their own community water tower there. In the days following the broadcast, a public outcry arose, but the station maintained that the listeners were reminded throughout the broadcast that it was only a performance. The Mercury Theater escaped punishment, and CBS, again, that's Frank Stanton, had to promise to never again use the, quote, "we interrupt this program," end quote, format in fictional entertainment. In 2003, the broadcast of The War of the Worlds was made part of the National Recording Registry of the Library of Congress. Now, interestingly, the Library of Congress is important in this story as well because one of the people who worked with the Princeton Radio Project, and he did a show just a week before the War of the Worlds broadcast, was a guy by the name of Archibald MacLeish, who was the librarian for the Library of Congress.
Yeah, no, it's there's a whole bunch of stuff packed in here. Just to give a couple things that are related to that. I mean, the first thing is that the date itself, right? So you have October 30th or October 31st. So that's the eve of Samhain, right? So that's a major satanic holiday where human sacrifice is usually performed, right? So this is kind of
Samhain is just so for people that don't know, that's the older name for Halloween.
Yeah, and then for the sort of satanic practices, and one of the things that's required for to properly fulfill the human sacrifice, you have to induce trauma, stress, mental anguish, and sheer terror. The final act in the drama should be destruction by fire, preferably. People must die as human sacrifices, since Lord Satan looks upon a younger human sacrifice as his most desirable. But so you have a little bit of this human sacrifice thing going on there. And then the water tower is also connected. There's a whole bunch of sort of archetypal symbolism, which I mentioned a little bit earlier. But the water tower not only represents the community, the collective will, but also the storing of history, memory, society. So the shattering of the water tower is a shattering of the community, right? It represents the shattering of the identity, sort of the backbone of America.
And this is exactly your point there. Exactly is what becomes MKUltra. Because War of the Worlds is the precursor to MKUltra, which they use to destroy society, to degrade society.
Yeah, and the water tower is also connected with the tower tarot card, right? And so you go into that with all the twin towers. Everyone's familiar with that, but the tower is one of the most sort of inauspicious cards you can get in tarot. And there's a lightning bolt striking a tower, and people are falling out of the tower. And so we have, again, the fire and the flames, people falling to their deaths. And so the tower card is also connected with Yod. Remember Baba Yod, the 10th letter of the Hebrew alphabet? He was one of those, running one of those mind control cults later in the 60s. But basically, the tower both can represent the achievement of material power and the destruction of people, the destruction of a false sense of security, right? And that, I think, is really kind of what's going on with the War of the Worlds in terms of terrorizing the population. And there's a column written by Dorothy Thompson just right after the event. I'll just read very briefly here. Quote, "All unwittingly, Mr. Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater of the Air have made one of the most fascinating and important demonstrations of all time. They prove that a few effective voices, accompanied by sound effects, can convince masses of people of a totally unreasonable, completely fantastic proposition as to create a nationwide panic. They have demonstrated more potently than any argument, demonstrated beyond a question of any doubt, the appalling dangers and the enormous effectiveness of political and theatrical demagoguery. Hitler managed to scare all Europe to its knees a month ago, but at least he had an army and an air force to back up his shrieking words. But Mr. Welles scared thousands into demoralization with nothing at all." Again, Mr. Welles scared thousands into demoralization with nothing at all. So and when you look at the script itself, there's a whole array of, symbolism. Hopefully we can play some quotes from that. But, the, script, starts out basically there's this intelligence. The world is being watched over by intelligences greater than their own. And just a quote from the script, play it, but I'll just say it here. Quote, "We now know that as human beings busied themselves about with their various concerns, they were scrutinized and studied, perhaps almost as narrowly as a man with a microscope might scrutinize the transient creatures that swarm and multiply in a drop of water. With infinite complacence, people went to and fro over the earth with their little affairs, serene in the assurances of their domination over this small spinning fragment of solar driftwood, which by chance or design man has inherited out of the dark mystery of time and space." But this idea of people being studied like they're little microbes in a speck of water is exactly what was going on with the Princeton Radio Project and with all these other studies and implementations of mass psychological programs.
Which, of course, fits right back to the water tower at Grover's Mill, and the opening of this whole thing, studying them like microbes in a drop of water, and then so anyway, there's the water tower. So Hans, are we ready to begin playing the audio of the War of the Worlds?
Let's go ahead and play it. Yeah.
All right.
The Columbia Broadcasting System and its affiliated stations present Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater on the air in The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. Ladies and gentlemen, the director of the Mercury Theater and star of these broadcasts, Orson Welles.
We know now that in the early years of the 20th century, this world was being watched closely by intelligences greater than man's, and yet as mortal as his own. We know now that as human beings busied themselves about their various concerns, they were scrutinized and studied, perhaps almost as narrowly as a man with a microscope might scrutinize the transient creatures that swarm and multiply in a drop of water. With infinite complacence, people went to and fro over the earth about their little affairs, serene in the assurance of their dominion over this small, spinning fragment of solar driftwood, which by chance or design, man has inherited out of the dark mystery of time and space. Yet across an immense ethereal gulf, minds that are to our minds as ours are to the beasts in the jungle, intellects, vast, cool, and unsympathetic, regarded this earth with envious eyes and slowly and surely drew their plans against us. In the 39th year of the 20th century came the Great Disillusionment. It was near the end of October. Business was better. The war scare was over. More men were back at work. Sales were picking up. On this particular evening, October 30th, the Crosley service estimated that 32 million people were listening in on radios.
For the next 24 hours, not much change in temperature. A slight atmospheric disturbance of undetermined origin is reported over Nova Scotia, causing a low-pressure area to move down rather rapidly over the northeastern states, bringing a forecast of rain accompanied by winds of light gale force. Maximum temperature 66, minimum 48. This weather report comes to you from the Government Weather Bureau. We take you now to the Meridian Room in the Hotel Park Plaza in downtown New York, where you will be entertained by the music of Raymond Raquello and his orchestra.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. From the Meridian Room in the Park Plaza Hotel in New York City, we bring you the music of Raymond Raquello and his orchestra. With a touch of the Spanish, Raymond Raquello leads off with La Comparsita. Ladies and gentlemen, we interrupt our program of dance music to bring you a special bulletin from the Intercontinental Radio News. At 20 minutes before 8 Central Time, Professor Farrell of the Mount Jennings Observatory, Chicago, Illinois, reports observing several explosions of incandescent gas occurring at regular intervals on the planet Mars. The spectroscope indicates the gas to be hydrogen and moving toward the Earth with enormous velocity. Professor Pearson of the observatory at Princeton confirms Farrell's observation and describes the phenomenon as, quote, like a jet of blue flame shot from a gun, unquote. We now return you to the music of Raymond Raquello, playing for you in the Meridian Room of the Park Plaza Hotel, situated in downtown New York. Now, a tune that never loses favor, the ever-popular Stardust, Raymond Raquello and his orchestra. Ladies and gentlemen, following on the news given in our bulletin a moment ago, the Government Meteorological Bureau has requested the large observatories of the country to keep an astronomical watch on any further disturbances occurring on the planet Mars. Due to the unusual nature of this occurrence, we have arranged an interview with the noted astronomer, Professor Pearson, who will give us his views on this event. In a few moments, we will take you to the Princeton Observatory at Princeton, New Jersey. We return you until then to the music of Raymond Raquello and his orchestra. We are ready now to take you to the Princeton Observatory at Princeton, where Carl Phillips, our commentator, will interview Professor Richard Pearson, famous astronomer. We take you now to Princeton, New Jersey.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Carl Phillips speaking to you from the observatory at Princeton. I'm standing in a large semicircular room, pitch black except for an oblong split in the ceiling. Through this opening, I can see a sprinkling of stars that cast a kind of frosty glow over the intricate mechanism of the huge telescope. The ticking sound you hear is the vibration of the clockwork. Professor Pearson stands directly above me on a small platform, peering through the giant lens. I'll ask you to be patient, ladies and gentlemen, during any delay that may arise during our interview. Besides the ceaseless watch of the heavens, Professor Pearson may be interrupted by telephone or other communications. During this period, he is in constant touch with the astronomical centers of the world. Professor, may I begin our questions?
Any time, Mr. Phillips.
Professor, would you please tell our radio audience exactly what you see as you observe the planet Mars through your telescope?
Nothing unusual at the moment, Mr. Phillips. A red disk swimming in a blue sea. Transverse stripes across the disk. Quite distinct now because Mars happens to be at the point nearest the Earth, in opposition, as we call it.
In your opinion, what do these transverse stripes signify, Professor Pearson?
Not canals, I can assure you, Mr. Phillips. Although that's the popular conjecture of those who imagine Mars to be inhabited. From a scientific viewpoint, the stripes are merely the result of atmospheric conditions peculiar to the planet.
Then you're quite convinced, as a scientist, that living intelligence as we know it does not exist on Mars?
I should say the chances against it are 1,000 to 1.
And yet, how do you account for these gas eruptions occurring on the surface of the planet at regular intervals?
Phillips, I cannot account for it.
By the way, Professor, for the benefit of our listeners, how far is Mars from the Earth?
Approximately 40 million miles.
Well, that seems a safe enough distance. Just a moment, ladies and gentlemen. Someone has just handed Professor Pearson a message. while he reads it, let me remind you that we are speaking to you from the observatory in Princeton, New Jersey, where we are interviewing the world-famous astronomer, Professor Pearson. One moment, please. Professor Pearson has passed me a message which he has just received. Professor, may I read the message to the listening audience?
Certainly, Mr. Phillips.
Ladies and gentlemen, I shall read you a wire addressed to Professor Pearson from Dr. Gray of the Natural History Museum, New York. Quote, 9:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Seismograph registered shock of almost earthquake intensity occurring within a radius of 20 miles of Princeton. Please investigate. Signed, Lloyd Gray, Chief of Astronomical Division. Unquote. Professor Pearson, could this occurrence possibly have something to do with the disturbances observed on the planet Mars?
Hardly, Mr. Phillips. This is probably a meteorite of unusual size, and its arrival at this particular time is merely a coincidence. However, we shall conduct a search as soon as daylight permits.
Thank you, Professor. Ladies and gentlemen, for the past 10 minutes, we've been speaking to you from the observatory at Princeton, bringing you a special interview with Professor Pearson, noted astronomer. This is Carl Phillips speaking. We are returning you now to our New York studio.
Ladies and gentlemen, here is the latest bulletin from the Intercontinental Radio News. Toronto, Canada. Professor Morse of Macmillan University reports observing a total of 3 explosions on the planet Mars between the hours of 7:45 p.m. and 9:20 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This confirms earlier reports received from American observatories. Now, nearer home, comes a special bulletin from Trenton, New Jersey. It is reported that at 8:50 p.m., a huge flaming object, believed to be a meteorite, fell on a farm in the neighborhood of Grover's Mill, New Jersey, 22 miles from Trenton.
All right, I want to jump in right there and just discuss for a moment here about Princeton. Now, they talk about this Princeton astronomer, Professor Pearson. And I did look that up. Richard Pearson, it doesn't appear to have ever been a real Professor Pearson astronomer by that name at Princeton. Just a few things here, though. Princeton was very heavily involved in this whole thing. And, of course, Hadley Cantrill, working directly under Dwight Eisenhower, was a key part of this. And, of course, Dwight Eisenhower's daughter, Laura Eisenhower, is out promoting UFOs and this same stuff today. And then we have DeWitt Poole, Poole, who is somebody that I discovered throughout the Princeton documents at the Princeton University libraries. And he apparently evaded other researchers prior to my going to Princeton to get this, because they were apparently pulling documents from the Rockefeller Foundation and not going to Princeton University directly. Another person heavily involved in this was Paul Lazarsfeld, and he was also working under the Rockefeller Foundation, working with Columbia University. Now, apparently, and this is something that I didn't realize before, is that Dwight Eisenhower was the dean of, apparently, I think it was Columbia University. Yes, it was Columbia University. So we have Lazarsfeld also working in Columbia University's Bureau of Applied Social Research. And we also have Gilbert Salettes, Harold P. Laswell, James R. Angle from Yale University, and Lyman Bryson involved in the project, and Richard LaPierre. And he goes on to later write, this is a similar related project, and he goes on to write Social Change. Also, we have, again, Frank Stanton, who we both already mentioned, from CBS. Frank Stanton was a very high up in all of this. President of Columbia, also, and you had mentioned a number of things that he worked with. He also worked with the Rand Corporation out here in Santa Monica, and as I mentioned earlier, his handler was Max Gordon, who was definitely giving him direct orders in the Princeton letters, and I'll show some of those quotes on screen here. So anyway, I just wanted to cover some of that so that people have a little bit of background on the level of Princeton's involvement with this psychological warfare operation. And Princeton, in my opinion, should be held accountable for this.
Yeah, no, it's quite interesting. I just wanted to go back over a few of the points from the broadcast, and I'll talk a bit about Cantrell and his earlier work on this. But one thing to note is that the voice of authority, right? So Cantrell did studies looking in his book, Psychology of Radio, looking into how people can talk to get the greatest degree of authority to make people believe what they're hearing. And what you might want to notice is there's a tension and release that's followed in the musical examples, and between the spoken examples. So you start out with a pretty ominous introduction from Orson Welles, right? And then you have, one could describe as it's kind of a Latin tango, but it's a pretty dark sounding piece of music, right? It's pretty dark. Then it goes to the next portion, which sort of increases attention. Then you go back to the song Stardust, which then you have that sort of interstellar reference as well as being a more, kind of relaxing piece of music. And then you have the observatory. And again, what's happening is there's the Princeton, Department for the Observation of Human Behavior. So in a sense, we're being observed. And even that Princeton is another little reference. Hey guys, it's a little inside joke. Like, hey, we're looking at you. And then that ticking clock. So that ticking clock is serving to also entrain the listeners with this tension, tick, 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 so you get that clock. I mean, I've been in planetariums. I've never heard clocks ticking like that, right?
Right.
And then you go from that to a nice little classical piece of music, back with the smooth jazz orchestra. And so you have this constant tension release that's going on, as well as, Cantrell, goes into detail about what types of voices people will listen to and take as authority. And he described that certain types of speakers from earlier types of public speaking, he describes as demagogues, would speak. That kind of voice doesn't work on radio. So the radio voice has to be much more nuanced. And also he describes the means by which people create a visual or an imaginary representation of what is occurring during the radio broadcast. And he talks about creating what's known as a congregate assembly of people, right? So you get this sort of virtual or imagined community, and how this is going to influence the mental and social life of the listeners. So it's creating sort of this artificial crowd and sort of binding people together through this, again, through a sort of a standardized perceptual matrix, right? So the idea that people are going to want to conform, people are going to want to be part of what they listen to. And in this case, you're not really part of a group or a crowd, you're part of this virtual group or crowd. So you're, in a certain way, it can influence people to sort of subconsciously or psychologically let themselves be part of certain categories just by our, sort of innate nature of wanting to be part of an in-group or part of a social thing. But it also, the idea that radio is creating it's a subliminal type of attentional focus. So even this is designed with the idea that our attention is not going to be solely focused on the radio. The attention is going to be sort of drifting in and out, but they create sort of this subliminal effect. So that's also kind of being employed in this broadcast. And then, finally, we'll get to a bit later in more detail, but he does talk about how radio is used for advertising, how radio can be used for educating or transforming the mind, and also how radio can be employed to extend the social environment, again, creating this shared psychological space that we inhabit, which is pretty much what we describe as our mass-mediated world today, right? So we don't necessarily have real contact with people, but we have this illusion of contact through these radio broadcasts. And I think it's important to note that, again, this is written several years before the implementation of the War of the Worlds, and in fact, Contral's study of the War of the Worlds broadcast formed one of the most important functions of the Princeton Radio Project.
Okay, and one thing that I forgot to mention before we started playing the audio there that I should just mention here very quickly is that it's very clear from Princeton University documents that they started this operation in about April 1937. So Princeton, the professors at Princeton, the dean at Princeton, all of these people were planning, coordinating, getting funding for all of this. And we do have the documents that prove that it was funded by the Rockefeller Foundation. And now I'm forgetting the guy who who they dealt with directly, but he's throughout the letters there as well. But anyway, from 1937, a full year and a half before October 30th, 1938, the documents show that Princeton University and the Rockefeller Foundation, etc., were already planning this. So anyway, let's go back to the War of the Worlds broadcast.
Let me just, Jan, before you do that, I wanted to mention that The Psychology of Radio was published in 1935 by Cantrell and Allport, as well as Stanton's dissertation, which was published in the mid-30s. So these guys were already working on understanding the psychological mechanism, and you can see how the program was ramped up over those previous years. So,
all right, so here we go.
In the neighborhood of Grover's Mill, New Jersey, 22 miles from Trenton, the flash in the sky was visible within a radius of several hundred miles, and the noise of the impact was heard as far north as Elizabeth. We have dispatched a special mobile unit to the scene, and we'll have our commentator, Carl Phillips, give you a word picture of the scene as soon as he can reach there from Princeton. In the meantime, we take you to the Hotel Martinet in Brooklyn, where Bobby Millett and his orchestra are offering a program of dance music. We take you now to Grover's Mill, New Jersey.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Carl Phillips again, out at the Wilmot Farm, Grover's Mill, New Jersey. Professor Pearson and myself made the 11 miles from Princeton in 10 minutes. Well, I hardly know where to begin. To paint for you a word picture of the strange scene before my eyes, like something out of a modern Arabian Nights. Well, I just got here. I haven't had a chance to look around yet. I guess that's it. Yes, I guess that's the thing directly in front of me, half buried in a vast pit. Must have struck with terrific force. The ground is covered with splinters of a tree. It must have struck on its way down. But I can see the object itself doesn't look very much like a meteor, at least not the meteors I've seen. It looks more like a huge cylinder. Has a diameter of, what would you say, Professor Pearson?
What's that?
What would you say, what's the diameter of this?
About 30 yards.
About 30 yards. The metal on the sheath is, well, I've never seen anything like it. The color is sort of yellowish white. Its curious spectators now are pressing close to the object in spite of the efforts of the police to keep them back. Getting in front of my line of vision. Would you mind standing one side, please? While the police are pushing the crowd back. Here's Mr. Wilmot, owner of the farm here. He may have some interesting facts to add. Mr. Wilmot, would you please tell the radio audience as much as you remember of this rather unusual visitor that dropped in your backyard? A step closer, please. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Mr. Wilmot.
Well, I was listening to the radio.
Closer and louder, please.
Pardon me?
Louder, please, closer.
Yes. I was listening to the radio and kind of drowsing. That professor fellow was talking about Mars, so I was half dozing and half...
Yes, Mr. Wilmot, and then what happened?
Well, as I was saying, I was listening to the radio, kind of halfway.
Yes, Mr. Wilmot. And then you saw something.
Well, not first off. I heard something.
And what did you hear?
A hissing sound like this. Kind of like a 4th of July rocket.
Yes, then what?
I turned my head out the window and would have sworn I was asleep and dreaming.
Yes?
I seen a kind of greenish streak and then zingo. Something smacked the ground, knocked me clear out of my chair.
Well, were you frightened, Mr. Wilmot?
Well, I ain't quite sure. I reckon I was kind of riled.
Well, thank you, Mr. Wilmot. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you want me to tell
No, that's
some
quite
more?
all right. That's plenty. Ladies and gentlemen, you've just heard Mr. Wilmot, owner of the farm where this thing has fallen. I wish I could convey the atmosphere, the background of this fantastic scene. Hundreds of cars are parked in a field in back of us, and the police are trying to rope off the roadway leading into the farm, but it's no use. They're breaking right through. The car's headlights throw an enormous spotlight on the pit where the object's half buried. Now, some of the more daring souls now are venturing near the edge. Their silhouettes stand out against the metal sheen. One man wants to touch the thing. He's having an argument with the policeman. Now, the policeman wins. Now, ladies and gentlemen, there's something I haven't mentioned in all this excitement, but it's becoming more distinct. Perhaps you've caught it already on your radio. Listen, please. Do you hear it? It's a curious humming sound that seems to come from inside the object. I'll move the microphone nearer. Here. Now, we're not more than 25 feet away. Can you hear it now? Professor Pearson,
Yes, Mr. Croft.
can you tell us the meaning of that scraping noise inside the thing?
Possibly the unequal cooling of its surface.
I say, do you still think it's a meteor, Professor?
I don't know what to think. The metal casing is definitely extraterrestrial. Not found on this Earth. Friction with the Earth's atmosphere usually tears holes in a meteorite. This thing is smooth, and you can see its cylindrical
Just a minute.
shape.
Something's happening. Ladies and gentlemen, this is terrific. This end of the thing is beginning to flake off. The top is beginning to rotate like a screw, and the thing must be hollow.
He's moving. Keep back there. Keep back there. Keep those men back. Keep back there. Keep those idiots back.
Ladies,
off. The top's loose. Look out there. Stand back.
ladies and gentlemen, this is the most terrifying thing I've ever witnessed. Wait a minute. Someone's crawling someone or something. I can see turning out of that black hole two luminous discs. The eyes, it might be a face, might be almost Good heavens, something wriggling out of the shadow like a gray snake. Now it's another one, and another one, and another one. They look like tentacles to me. Oh, yeah, I can see the thing's body. Now it's large as a bear. It glistens like wet leather, but that face, ladies and gentlemen, it's indescribable. I can hardly force myself to keep looking at it. It's so awful. The eyes are black, and they gleam like a serpent. The mouth is kind of V-shaped with saliva dripping from its rimless lips. It seemed to quiver and pulsate, and the monster, or whatever it is, can hardly move. It seems weighed down by possibly gravity or something. The thing's rising up now, and the crowd falls back. They've seen plenty. The most extraordinary experience, ladies and gentlemen. I can't find words. Well, I'll pull this microphone with me as I talk. I'll have to stop the description until I can take a new position. Hold on, will you, please? I'll be right back in a minute.
We are bringing you an eyewitness account of what's happening on the Wilmouth Farm, Grover's Mill, New Jersey. We now return you to Carl Phillips at Grover's Mill.
Ladies and gentlemen, am I on? Ladies and gentlemen, here I am, back of a stone wall that adjoins Mr. Wilmot's garden. From here, I get a sweep of the whole scene. I'll give you every detail as long as I can talk and as long as I can see. There's more state police have arrived. They're drawing up a cordon in front of the pit. About 30 of them. No need to push the crowd back now. They're willing to keep their distance. The captain's conferring with someone. Can't quite see who. Oh, yes, I believe it's Professor Pearson. Yes, it is. Now they've parted, and the professor moves around one side, studying the object while the captain and two policemen advance with something in their hands. I can see it now. It's a white handkerchief tied to a pole. Flag of truce. If those creatures know what that means, what anything means. Wait a minute, something's happening. A humped shape is rising out of the pit. I can make out a small beam of light against a mirror. What's that? There's a jet of flame springing from the mirror, and it leaps right at the advancing men. It strikes them head on. Lord, they're turning into flames. Now the whole field's caught up by the woods, the barns, the gas tanks of the automobiles, spreading everywhere. It's coming this way now, about 20 yards to my right.
Ladies and gentlemen, due to circumstances beyond our control, we are unable to continue the broadcast from Grover's Mill. Evidently, there's some difficulty with our field transmission. However, we will return to that point at the earliest opportunity. In the meantime, we have a late bulletin from San Diego, California. Professor Indelkoffer, speaking at a dinner of the California Astronomical Society, expressed the opinion that the explosions on Mars are undoubtedly nothing more than severe volcanic disturbances on the surface of the planet. We continue now with our piano interlude.
Ladies and gentlemen, I've just been handed a message that came in from Grover's Mill by telephone. Just one moment, please. At least 40 people, including 6 state troopers, lie dead in a field east of the village of Grover's Mill. Their bodies burned and distorted beyond all possible recognition. The next voice you hear will be that of Brigadier General Montgomery Smith, commander of the state militia at Trenton, New Jersey.
I have been requested by the governor of New Jersey to place the counties of Mercer and Middlesex as far west as Princeton and east to Jamesburg under martial law. No one will be permitted to enter this area except by special pass issued by state or military authorities. 4 companies of state militia are proceeding from Trenton to Grover's Mill and will aid in the evacuation of homes within the range of military operations. Thank you.
You have just been listening to General Montgomery Smith, commanding the state militia at Trenton. In the meantime, further details of the catastrophe at Grover's Mill are coming in. The strange creatures, after unleashing their deadly assault, crawled back in their pit and made no attempt to prevent the efforts of the firemen to recover the bodies and extinguish the fire. The combined fire departments of Mercer County are fighting the flames which menace the entire countryside. We have been unable to establish any contact with our mobile unit at Grover's Mill, but we hope to be able to return you there at the earliest possible moment. In the meantime, we take you to... Just one moment, please. Ladies and gentlemen, I have just been informed that we have finally established communication with an eyewitness of the tragedy. Professor Pearson has been located at a farmhouse near Grover's Mill, where he has established an emergency observation post. As a scientist, he will give you his explanation of the calamity. The next voice you hear will be that of Professor Pearson, brought to you by direct wire. Professor Pearson.
Of the creatures in the rocket cylinder at Grover's Mill, I can give you no authoritative information, either as to their nature, their origin, or their purposes here on Earth. Of their destructive instrument, I might venture some conjectural explanation. For want of a better term, I shall refer to the mysterious weapon as a heat ray. It's all too evident that these creatures have scientific knowledge far in advance of our own. It's my guess that in some way they are able to generate an intense heat in a chamber of practically absolute non-conductivity. This intense heat they project in a parallel beam against any object they choose by means of a polished parabolic mirror of unknown composition, much as the mirror of a lighthouse projects a beam of light. That is my conjecture of the origin of the heat ray.
Thank you, Professor Pearson. Ladies and gentlemen, here is a bulletin from Trenton. It is a brief statement informing us that the charred body of Carl Phillips has been identified in a Trenton hospital. Now, here's another bulletin from Washington, D.C. The Office of the Director of the National Red Cross reports 10 units of Red Cross emergency workers have been assigned to the headquarters of the state militia, stationed outside of Grover's Mill, New Jersey. Here's a bulletin from State Police, Princeton Junction. The fires at Grover's Mill and vicinity are now under control. Scouts report all quiet in the pit, and there is no sign of life appearing from the mouth of the cylinder. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we have a special statement from Mr. Harry McDonald, Vice President in charge of operations.
We have received a request from the state militia of Trenton to place at their disposal our entire broadcasting facilities. In view of the gravity of the situation, and believing that radio has a responsibility to serve in the public interest at all times, We are turning over our facilities to the state militia at Trenton.
We take you now to the field headquarters of the state militia near Grover's Mill, New Jersey.
This is Captain Lansing of the Signal Corps, attached to the state militia, now engaged in military operations in the vicinity of Grover's Mill. Situation arising from the reported presence of certain individuals of unidentified nature is now under complete control. The cylindrical object, which lies in a pit directly below our position, surrounded on all sides by 8 battalions of infantry, without heavy field pieces, but adequately armed with rifles and machine guns. All cause for alarm, if such cause ever existed, is now entirely unjustified. The things, whatever they are, do not even venture to poke their heads above the pit. I can see their hiding place plainly in the glare of the searchlights here. With all their reported resources, these creatures can scarcely stand up against heavy machine gun fire. Anyway, it's an interesting outing for the troops. I can make out their khaki uniforms crossing back and forth in front of the lights. Looks almost like a real war. There appears to be some slight smoke in the woods bordering the Millstone River, probably fire started by campers. Well, we ought to see some action soon. One of the companies is deploying on the left flank. A quick thrust and it'll all be over. Now, wait a minute. I see something on top of the cylinder. No, it's nothing but a shadow. Now the troops are on the edge of the Wilmot Farm. 7,000 armed men closing in on an old metal tube. A tub, rather. Well, wait, that wasn't a shadow. It's something moving. Solid metal, kind of a shield-like affair rising up out of the cylinder. It's going higher and higher. What? It's standing on legs, actually rearing up on a sort of metal framework. Now it's reaching above the trees and the searchlights are on it. Hold on.
All right, so that thing standing up on its legs like a tower, that is the water tower. Now the water tower is actually coming to attack Grover's Mill and the local population.
Attack of the community resources, the community knowledge, community solidarity being destroyed. Yeah, no, I mean, what's telling about this is that, all these guys started doing this research again around 1935, and Stanton, they came up, with this method to track audiences, to try to, get some statistical analysis of social groups to see how they're being influenced by that. And Stanton actually worked for CBS, who broadcast War of the Worlds. And the next day they asked him to go ahead and apply his new research methods to see the audience effect of War of the Worlds. And I just want to read a quote. This is from a personal letter of Hadley Cantrell, and he says, quote, "The increased central control has obvious political implications, and the use of radio for political and other purposes of propaganda points to another area, opinion formation. For a number of technical reasons, this project has not gone beyond preliminary work in this area. As a substitute, however, an opportunity was given to study the effects of the Orson Welles broadcast, War of the Worlds. This study is not only an interesting link between the area of news dissemination and reaction formation, it also permits observation of the role of the human voice as a carrier of radio content." So that's basically they were able to implement their data, their methodologies to this wonderfully fortuitous event. And again, it's important to understand that there's a lot of different things going on, especially the interrupted narrative, especially the use of music, especially the use of the voices as you see people getting more and more disturbed, starting out very calm, we're all fine, everything's fine, and things like that. And actually Orson Welles was one of the most popular, speakers, and his voice has all of these particular characteristics that give a particular psychological reaction in audiences, including his authoritative figure, including his sense of, you could say, creating trustworthiness. I guess you could say that people would believe things that Orson Welles said just because his voice is so compelling in that way.
And, excuse me, I want to read a letter to Dr. DeWitt Poole. This is from, and you know, it's sent to him at Public Opinion Quarterly, which is obviously public relations, at Princeton, New Jersey. And this is from Myron Weiss, who was the associate editor of Time magazine. Now, of course, Henry Luce, Time magazine, Life magazine, etc., were heavily involved in MKUltra. In fact, Time Life magazines were funded by J.P. Morgan Bank, as I've shown in my other articles. And anyway, this is from the morning after, the same morning as that New York Times article, already predicting everything that happened from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. when they hit the button on the printer. But anyway, October 31st, 1938. Dear Dr. Poole, I hope that you analyze that beautiful clinical demonstration of public reactions which Columbia Broadcasting System stirred up Sunday night by means of actor Orson Welles' radio version of writer H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds. And compare those reactions with the lack of uproar which followed poet Archibald MacLeish's. Again, that's the head. He was also the librarian at the U.S. Library of Congress. Archibald MacLeish's play Air Raid over CBS last Friday evening. Will you please give my greetings to Dr. Childs? And then Dr. DeWitt Poole replies to Dr. Weiss. He says, returning from a short absence, and this is on November 7th, so this is a week later. He says, Dear Dr. Weiss, returning from a short absence, I find your letter of October 31 concerning the stir made by the War of the Worlds, and I have talked the matter over with Dr. Childs. From him I learn, and that's very important here, that this interesting phenomena to which you refer is already being studied by our radio research project under the leadership of Professor Hadley Cantrell. Yours sincerely, D.C. Poole. Now, again, Princeton's archives make it very, very clear that Dr. Poole was involved in funding the project and writing back and forth with Rockefeller, or with the Rockefeller Foundation and the people there. But there are numerous letters here, that I got photographs of. Here's one from June 18, 1937, to Mr. John Marshall, who's the assistant director of the Rockefeller Foundation, and that's who was their contact at Rockefeller for the most part for getting the funding for this project. And so we have letters. I've got letters here from Dr. Poole from, like I said earlier, I think it looks like April 1937, September. I've got several dozens of letters here I'm flipping through, but all the letters before and after this project was funded. So, it's very clear that they knew about this long before. Let me see if I can just find one of these good letters here from okay, so this is from, to Dr. Poole from John Marshall. The document is, the letterhead is the Rockefeller Foundation, 49 West 49th Street, New York, July 1, 1937. The Humanities, David H. Stevens, director, John Marshall, assistant director. And it says, Dear Mr. Poole, my personal involvement in public affairs in the shape of jury duty has prevented me from replying before this to your letter of June 18 with regard to the possibility of increasing the salary of the director of the school's radio project from $7,500 to $9,500. Now, keep in mind, folks, that this is in 1937. So in 1937, compared to today's money, you're talking about probably 17 times higher value. So let's say $9,500. Let's say just to be safe, 18 times the value. You're talking about $171,000 they're paying these guys salary on the side, aside from their Princeton University salaries, their CBS salaries, etc. They're getting $170K on the side as salary to fund this mind control program. And he says, as I believe the secretary of the foundation informed President Dodds in reporting the foundation's recent grant for this project, we should in any case expect to have a final budget before payments under the grant were made. This presumably would be substantially in accord with the budget submitted with the request on which the foundation's grant was based, certainly to the extent of the corresponding with the totals there indicated for salaries, travel, tabulation of data, printing, postage, equipment, and contingent. I see no reason, however, why adjustments cannot be made within these totals. Thus, if it now seems best to you and to Dr. Cantrill to relocate funds for salaries within the $22,000 total set up for this earlier budget, in the way suggested, I see no objection to your doing so and shall consequently be glad to give my approval to such a change if it were incorporated in the final budget you submit. Sincerely, yours sincerely, John Marshall. And again, I do have the budget proposal that was sent to the Rockefeller Foundation here also. And in the top left corner of the front page, it is marked confidential. And then you can see in there that Paul Lazarsfeld was a associate director, Hadley Cantrill director, Frank Stanton associate director, Marjorie Fisk, the secretary, and Miss Franklin Taylor, the stenographer. And then, later, this one says that Paul Lazarsfeld was the director. This was changed, and then later Hadley Cantrill became the director. But this does, in fact, show the $7,500 salary on it. And again, this is for the date that this was prepared was for the 1937-38 year, and this is the Princeton University Budget of Appropriations for the college year 1937-38, Department of the Office, School of Public and International Affairs, Office of Radio Research, marked again confidential. Do you have anything to add to that, Hans?
Well, I just wanted to talk about Poole, D.C. Poole. He actually was a major figure, and the fact that he's not talked about publicly as being connected with the Radio Research Project is a bit telling, because Poole was major. He was actually a diplomat, but he also was a spy. So he was a consulate working for the American consulate, he was conducting clandestine networks in Russia, and was also, deeply involved in helping to get America into World War II. He was the founder of Public Opinion Quarterly, which also became one of the main sort of industry journals for psychological operations and psychological warfare. He managed the Coordinator of Information Office, which was a predecessor to the OSS. So he was actually working directly with even the pre-OSS, pre-CIA. And so very much an intelligence agent. And he also worked for disseminating and distribute psychological warfare materials during the Cold War. So Poole was very much involved from the beginning of his career until the end with psychological warfare operations and also with intelligence agencies. And again, that's just sort of the surface, as well as managing the School of Public Affairs, being director of the School of Public Affairs at Princeton. So again, Poole was a major, figure in terms of both working for and against the Soviets, both disseminating propaganda supposedly just abroad, but I'm sure also was disseminated.
Well, we have proof here that he was, using propaganda against the American public. So,
yeah, and in terms of the study of mass hysteria, you look at other mass panics, which are included. Examples include mass hysteria induced by rock and roll, by Elvis. There are even certain new dance moves called what's known as moral panics. You have both pro and against. You have people getting totally excited by it, and you have, all these reactions against it. You have, you could say, like, people talk about the Satanic panic in the 80s and 90s with, false memory syndrome, supposedly, et cetera. But all these panics or these mass hysterias were, as Cantrell talks about so openly, that this gave us a chance to actually study these things with a statistical background. Now, according to some things I've read, they only had about 30 subjects supposedly for their research, and it's that only 4 out of 30 people actually understood even the plot of the play. No one could even understand. Most people were so induced into a panic state, they could not follow the storyline. They didn't even know it was a story. It basically induced this kind of fear response. And primarily these were people drawn from around the Princeton area. And again, how much more obvious do you need to get the fact that why did they set it in Princeton where they're running the radio research project? And, and then all the people
and Grover's Mill, like I said, it's right down the street. It's like, with traffic, it's probably 12, 20 minutes tops,
Yeah, and let me just read a quote from, this is a shorter version of Cantrell's book. This is sort of an article on his book that was, written about, that was a study, produced through the Princeton Radio Research Project. And let me just read some quotes because it's pretty telling. Okay. Probably never before have so many people in all walks of life and in all parts of the country become so suddenly and so intensely disturbed as they did on this night. Okay, so what we're looking at, just going back a little bit to the earlier research on radio, you're looking at creating people from all different identifications, right, are being put into new categories. So in a sense, the media is creating new social categories. Okay, we'll continue. Such rare occurrences provide opportunities for the social scientist to study mass behavior. They must be exploited when they come. Although the social scientist, unfortunately, cannot usually predict such situations and have his tools of investigation ready to analyze the phenomena while it is still on the wing, he can begin his work before the effects of the crisis are over and memories are blurred. The situation created by the broadcast was one which shows us how the common man reacts in time of stress and strain. It gives us insights into his intelligence, his anxieties, and his needs, which we could never get by tests or strictly experimental studies. The panic situation we have investigated had all the flavor of everyday life, and at the same time provided a semi-experimental condition for research. In spite of the unique conditions giving rise to this particular panic, the writer has attempted to indicate throughout the study of the pattern of the circumstances from which a psychological point of view might make this the prototype of any panic. Okay, and I think that is pretty, if we start taking that apart, we see a direct just laying out exactly what's going on. And again, note that these guys that started in 1935, working up their research methodology, all came together. And Stanton actually went to use his methodology to predict audience responses. So in a sense, we have predictive responses of the audience, applying this social demographic theory, applying all these other insights of media and narrative, et cetera, and was able to say, well, the audience will respond this way to a particular program. Supposedly this came out in the 1940s. And just one other thing is that a lot of the research in Princeton Radio Project after this initial foray started to work on propaganda and working towards propaganda. So you see a pretty successful scientific operation here.
All right, and let's go on to play the next segment of Orson Welles' War of the Worlds. Here we go.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have a grave announcement to make. Incredible as it may seem, both the observations of science and the evidence of our eyes lead to the inescapable assumption that those strange beings who landed in the Jersey farmlands tonight are the vanguard of an invading army from the planet Mars. The battle which took place tonight at Grover Mills has ended in one of the most startling defeats ever suffered by an army in modern times. 7,000 men armed with rifles and machine guns pitted against a single fighting machine of the invaders from Mars. 120 known survivors. The rest strewn over the battle area from Grover's Mill to Plainsboro, crushed and trampled to death under the metal feet of the monster, or burned to cinders by its heat ray. The monster is now in control of the middle section of New Jersey and has effectively cut the state through its center. Communication lines are down from Pennsylvania to the Atlantic Ocean. Railroad tracks are torn and service from New York to Philadelphia discontinued, except routing some of the trains through Allerton and Phoenixville. Highways to the north, south, and west are clogged with frantic human traffic. Police and army reserves are unable to control the mad flight. By morning, the fugitives will have swelled Philadelphia, Camden, and Trenton. It is estimated to twice their normal population. Martial law prevails throughout New Jersey and eastern Pennsylvania. At this time, we take you to Washington for a special broadcast on the national emergency. The Secretary of the Interior.
Citizens of the nation, I shall not try to conceal the gravity of the situation that confronts the country, nor the concern of your government in protecting the lives and property of its people. However, I wish to impress upon you, private citizens and public officials, all of you, the urgent need of calm and resourceful action. Fortunately, this formidable enemy is still confined to a comparatively small area, and we may place our faith in the military forces to keep them there. In the meantime, placing our faith in God, we must continue the performance of our duties, each and every one of us, so that we may confront this destructive adversary with a nation united, courageous, and consecrated to the preservation of human supremacy on this earth. I thank you.
You have just heard the Secretary of the Interior speaking from Washington. Bulletins too numerous to read are piling up in the studio here. We're informed that the central portion of New Jersey is blacked out from radio communication due to the effect of the heat ray upon power lines and electrical equipment. Here's a special bulletin in New York. Cables have been received from English, French, and German scientific bodies offering assistance. Astronomers report continued gas outbursts at regular intervals on the planet Mars. The majority voiced the opinion that the enemy will be reinforced by additional rocket machines. There have been several attempts made to locate Professor Pearson of Princeton, who has observed Martians at close range. It is feared he was lost in the recent battle. Langham Field, Virginia. Scouting planes report 3 Martian machines visible above treetops, moving north toward Somerville with population fleeing ahead of them. The heat ray is not in use, although advancing at express train speed, invaders pick their way carefully. They seem to be making a conscious effort to avoid destruction of cities and countryside. However, they stop to uproot power lines, bridges, and railroad tracks. Their apparent objective is to crush resistance, paralyze communication, and disorganize human society. Here is a bulletin from Basking Ridge, New Jersey. Coon hunters have stumbled on a second cylinder similar to the first, embedded in the great swamp 20 miles south of Morristown. Army field pieces are proceeding before the cylinder can be opened and the fighting machine rigged. They are taking up a position in the foothills of Watchung Mountains. Another bulletin from Langham Field, Virginia. Scouting planes report enemy machines, now 3 in number, increasing speed northward, kicking over houses and trees in their evident haste to form a conjunction with their allies south of Morristown. Machines also sighted by telephone operator east of Middlesex, within 10 miles of Plainfield. Here's a bulletin from Winston-Field, Long Island. A fleet of Army bombers carrying heavy explosive flying north in pursuit of enemy. Scouting planes act as guides. They keep the speeding enemy in sight. Just a moment, please, ladies and gentlemen. We've run special wires to the artillery line in adjacent villages to give you direct reports in the zone of the advancing enemy. First, we take you to the battery of the 22nd Field Artillery, located in the Watchung Mountains.
Range 32 meters.
32 meters.
Projection 39 degrees.
39 degrees. Fire.
140 yards to the right, sir. Shift range, 31 meters.
31 meters.
Projection 37 degrees.
37 degrees. Fire.
Hit, sir. Got the tripod of one of them. Let's stop. The others are trying to repair it. Quick, get the range. Shift 30 meters.
30 meters.
Projection 27 degrees.
27 degrees.
Fire. Can't see the shell land, sir. Letting off a smoke. What is it? Black smoke, sir. Moving this way. Lying close to the ground. Moving fast. Put on gas masks. Get ready to fire. Shift to 24 meters.
24 meters.
Projection 24 degrees.
24 degrees.
Fire. Still can't see, sir. Smoke's coming nearer. Get the range. 50 feet. Meters. 23 meters. 23 meters. Projection 22 degrees. 22 degrees.
Army bombing plane V-843 off Bayonne, New Jersey. Lieutenant Vogt, commanding 8 bombers, reporting to Commander Fairfax, Langham Field. This is Vogt reporting to Commander Fairfax, Langham Field. Enemy tripod machines now in sight. Reinforced by 3 machines from the Morristown cylinder. 6 altogether. 1 machine partially crippled. Believed hit by shell from Army gun in Watchung Mountains. Guns now appear silent. A heavy black fog hanging close to the earth of extreme density, nature unknown. No sign of heat ray. Enemy now turns east, crossing Passaic River into the Jersey marshes. Another straddles the Pulaski Skyway. Evident objective is New York City. They're pushing down a high-tension power station. The machines are close together now, and we're ready to attack. Planes circling, ready to strike. 1,000 yards, and we'll be over the first. $800 yards. $600. $400. $200. There they go. The giant arm raised. Green flash. They're spraying us with flame. 2,000 feet. Engines are giving out. No chance to release bombs. Only one thing left. Drop on them, plane and all. We're diving on the first one. Now the engine's gone. 8.
This is Bayonne, New Jersey, calling Langham Field. This is Bayonne, New Jersey, calling Langham Field. Come in, please.
This is Langham Field. Go ahead.
8 Army bombers in engagement with enemy tripod machines over Jersey Flats. Engines incapacitated by heat ray. All crashed. 1 enemy machine destroyed. Enemy now discharging heavy black smoke in direction of...
This is Newark, New Jersey. This is Newark, New Jersey. Warning. Poisonous black smoke pouring in from Jersey marshes. Reaches South Street. Gas masks useless. Urge population to move into open spaces. Automobiles use routes 7, 23, 24. Avoid congested areas. Smoke now spreading over Raymond Boulevard.
"2X2L calling CQ, 2X2L calling CQ, 2X2L calling 8X3R. Come in, please."
This is 8X3R coming back at 2X2L.
How's reception? How's reception? K, please. Where are you, 8X3R? What's the matter? Where are you?
I'm speaking from the roof of Broadcasting Building. I'm speaking from the roof of Broadcasting Building, New York City. The bells you hear are ringing to warn the people to evacuate the city as the Martians approach. Estimated in the last 2 hours, 3 million people have moved out along the roads to the north. Hutchison River Parkway is still kept open for motor traffic. Avoid bridges to Long Island, hopelessly jammed. All communication with Jersey Shore closed 10 minutes ago. No more defenses. Our army is wiped out. Artillery, Air Force, everything wiped out. This may be the last broadcast. We'll stay here to the end. People are holding service here below us in the cathedral. Now I look down the harbor, all manner of boats, overloaded with fleeing population pulling out from docks. Streets are all jammed. Noise and crowds like New Year's Eve in city. Wait a minute, the enemy is now in sight above the Palisades. Five great machines. First one is crossing the river. I can see it from here, wading the Hudson like a man wading through a brook. A bulletin is handed me. Martian cylinders are falling all over the country. One outside of Buffalo, one in Chicago, St. Louis. Seem to be timed and spaced. Now the first machine reaches the shore. He stands watching, looking over the city. The steel cowlish head is even with the skyscrapers. He waits for the others. They rise like a line of new towers on the city's west side. Now they're lifting their metal hands. This is the end now. Smoke comes out, black smoke drifting over the city. People in the streets see it now. They're running toward the East River, thousands of them, dropping in like rats. Now the smoke's spreading faster. It's reached Times Square. People are trying to run away from it, but it's no use. They're falling like flies. Now the smoke's crossing 6th Avenue. 5th Avenue. 100 yards away. It's 50 feet.
Calling CQ. 2X2L calling CQ. 2X2L calling CQ, New York. Isn't there anyone on the air? Isn't there anyone on the air? Isn't there anyone? 2X2L.
You are listening to a CBS presentation of Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater on the Air in an original dramatization of The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. The performance will continue after a brief intermission. This is the Columbia Broadcasting System.
That seems like a good spot to jump in. So, what did you think of that nice little segment there, Hans? The total annihilation of the eastern seaboard, essentially, and dramatizing it all up, making it sound like they can't reach anyone.
Yeah, well, the sense of helplessness and hopelessness is something that Cantrell talks about a little bit. I was just, looking over his. Let me just read another quote from him, because he has a bunch of quotes from people that he interviewed, and they talk about what happened. We had nothing to do. Even the president himself gave up. President, there's nothing you can do. Just go pray, and you're gonna die. There you go. You're helpless. But a little quote here from Lazenfeld. So the fact that the panic was created as a result of a radio broadcast is today no mere circumstance. Really? Okay. The importance of radio's role in current national and international affairs is too well known to be recounted here. By its very nature, radio is the medium par excellence for informing all segments of a population of current happenings, for arousing in them a common sense of fear or joy, and for exciting them to similar reactions directed towards a single objective. Long before the broadcast had ended, people all over the United States were praying, crying, freeing frantically to escape death from the Martians. Some ran to rescue loved ones. Other telephoned farewells or warnings, hurried to inform neighbors, sought information from newspapers or radio stations, summoned ambulances and police cars. At least 6 million people heard the broadcast. At least 1 million of them were frightened or disturbed. And he goes on to say that, newspapers ran stories about this for weeks and weeks after, and even this report, as what we've come to know, is also part of the psyop.
Right. Now, and in fact, it appears that all of the evidence of panics, only a couple seem to pan out. Most of that evidence is anecdotal. There's no citations. You can't go look up specific reports and things, or it's very difficult to. So I would say, a lot more research needs to be done from October 30, the morning of October 31st, 1938, through the following week or two, maybe up to November 10 or November 14, 1938. And verify, these reports. So, are we ready for the next segment?
Yeah.
The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells, starring Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater on the air.
I set down these notes on paper. I'm obsessed by the thought that I may be the last living man on Earth. I've been hiding in this empty house near Grover's Mill, a small island of daylight cut off by the black smoke from the rest of the world. All that happened before the arrival of these monstrous creatures in the world now seems part of another life. A life that has no continuity with the present. Furtive existence of the lonely derelict who pencils these words on the back of some astronomical notes bearing the signature of Richard Pearson. I look down at my blackened hand and I try to connect them with a professor who lives at Princeton and who, on the night of October 20th, glimpsed through his telescope an orange splash of light on a distant planet. My wife, my colleagues, my students, my books, my observatory, my world. Where are they? Did they ever exist? Am I Richard Pearson? What day is it? Do days exist without calendars? Does time pass when there are no human hands left to wind the clocks? Writing down my daily life, I tell myself I shall preserve human history between the dark covers of this little book that was meant to record the movements of the stars. But to write, I must live, and to live, I must eat. Find moldy bread in the kitchen and an orange not too spoiled to swallow. Keep watch at the window. Time to time, I catch sight of a Martian above the black smoke. The smoke still holds the house in its black coil, but at length there's a hissing sound, and suddenly I see a Martian mounted on his machine, spraying the air with a jet of steam as if to dissipate the smoke. I watch in a corner as his huge metal legs nearly brush against the house. Exhausted by terror, I fall asleep. It's morning. Morning. Sun streams in the window. The black cloud of gas is lifted, and the scorched meadows to the north look as though a black snowstorm had passed over them. I venture from the house. I make my way to a road, no traffic. Here and there, a wrecked car, baggage overturned, a blackened skeleton. Push on north. For some reason, I feel safer trailing these monsters than running away from them. And I keep a careful watch. I've seen the Martians feed. Should one of their machines appear over the top of trees, I'm ready to fling myself flat on the earth. I come to a chestnut tree. October. Chestnuts are ripe. Fill my pockets. I must keep alive. 2 days I wander in a vague northerly direction through a desolate world. Finally, I notice a living creature. A small red squirrel in a beech tree. I stare at him and wonder. He stares back at me. I believe at that moment the animal and I shared the same emotion. The joy of finding another living being. Push on north. I find dead cows in a brackish field, and beyond the charred ruins of a dairy, the silo remains standing guard over the wasteland like a lighthouse, deserted by the sea. Astride the silo perches a weathercock. The arrow points north. North. Next day, I come to a city. City vaguely familiar in its contours, yet its buildings strangely dwarfed and leveled off as if a giant had sliced off its highest towers with a capricious sweep of his hand. Reached the outskirts. I found Newark. Newark, undemolished but humbled by some whim of the advancing Martians. Presently, with an odd feeling of being watched, I caught sight of something crouching in a doorway. I made a step towards it, and it rose up and became a man. A man armed with a large knife.
Stop! Where do you come from?
Oh, I come from many places. A long time ago, from Princeton.
Princeton, huh? That's near Grover's Mill.
Yes.
Grover's Mill.
I think that's a good spot.
Yeah.
You know, even in the broadcast here, they repeatedly refer to Princeton. They admit that Princeton is right near Grover's Mill, so they're seeding clues to the public, you know, that Princeton is involved in all of this. Again, they mentioned, you know, the fake astronomer, Dr. Richard Pearson at Princeton. And, you know, of course, they're, you know, over-dramatizing, you know, okay, all humanity's been wiped out. You know, only this guy and a red squirrel exists. Oh, look, there's some chestnuts. I better put them in my pocket. So they're, you know, seeding the worst, you know, they're attempting to seed the worst possible levels of panic in, you know, the population that heard this.
Yeah, and, you know, in fact, the study, if you look at it, you know, in terms of not only generating tension, right? So, and then but also in terms of analyzing the population and how how to find ways to go beyond the critical reasoning facility. So in terms of the study, that Cantrell did, whether or not, all these accounts, these firsthand accounts are actually valid, they're quite interesting just to see how this was thought of. But he talks a lot about suggestibility and finding out what are the methods for determining how someone is suggestible? How do you put events within an existing psychological framework so they're perceived as true? And he also talks about how the disturbances from the Great Depression, things like that, can also be used as sort of a projective mechanism to push people into these panic states or these fear states. And of course, I think our modern culture is witness to the extensive use of these methodologies. And again, whether or not you're affected so much so that you're going to go out and drive your car into a ditch, trying to flee with all your belongings and then talk to a squirrel. I wish that was really emotional. He's like, Orson Welles just touched my heart there. I just wanted a violin. Man, you should have been playing violin when he said that, because it was beautiful. But the fact is that we're looking at something quite, it's, you could say, well, they want to keep their funding, so they're going to say that it works, but they're also constructing the event in the past, right? They're reconstructing it. And if it's true the panic really didn't happen, as was stated, they've exerted a huge amount of effort to make a huge controversy about the event and, sharing narratives. And in fact, in 2014, they had a study or a group where all these different people listened to War of the Worlds. They're tweeting and texting each other. About this study they did?
I haven't heard of that, no.
Okay, I'll send you a link to that. And they said all these people listening to it and seeing their reactions and bringing it back, on the 75th anniversary. So there's just been such a huge amount of research and keep bringing this event up. And even within this project where again where people were revisiting it and seeing what they experienced, they stated, well, it's questionable why media studies had made this such an important event, given the fact that probably the findings were exaggerated. And
well, when you understand that the propaganda, that everything was exaggerated, and you understand that the exaggeration of the impact of War of the Worlds was the operation, then you begin to understand the totality of what they're doing here.
Yeah, but also, there's a lot of research into the techniques, again, different kinds of voices, emotional voices, even the use of silences, right, where the sound cuts out and things like that. So there's many different techniques. Actually, were quite advanced at the time, right, employing all these techniques. So it's kind of like a meta broadcast, right? They're normally in a radio broadcast. And also notice there were no commercial interruptions except before the Orson Welles, Shakespearean little monologue there at the end, the cows and the brackish fields. But the thing is that this understanding of various personality types and also creating, in a sense, it's also like the Wizard of Oz. You're saying, well, look how powerful the media is. Look how this works to induce panics. At the same time, people are acquiescing by accepting the fact that these things are occurring. So then you create more, again, of this double bind process. But there is a lot of good, details, that he did come up with in terms of how to get people to find how people are suggestible and find these conditions and how to increase them. So how people are checking data, people that don't check data, people that the main thing cited though was the voices of authority. And when I heard the doctor, I knew it was true. When I heard the senator, when I heard the military guy, when I heard this, so you have this
constant ad veracundium.
Yeah, and so this operation though, and then you see the really the weird or insidious aspect of it is that not only are you possibly attempting to induce a panic, but you're also setting up the mechanisms by which you'll study that panic prior to the panic, and then you're memorializing this. I mean, 75 years later, why? Again, let me reiterate the question of this group that, did, had all these people listen to it and have their reactions, how they're feeling 75 years later. Why the hell are we still being jammed down our throats? And I do believe that there is some other dimension of it in that it's almost like a casting of the spell over the consciousness of America or of the world, that the War of the Worlds, not only, of course, presaging World War II, and having the fact that it was set in 1939, October 30th. You look at all the events on October 31st throughout, the Beltane, all this stuff. You see that it's an inductive process. It is also, I almost believe that by creating the almost infallible power of these masterminds to manipulate our consciousness, we start believing in their power more than they have, right? So you're investing more power into what they're doing. At the same time, all the clues are there for anyone who wants to take the time to go to the archive in Princeton or look at just these connections.
Apparently, I was the only one in 70 years.
Yeah. Yeah, and let me just read a little more quote from Cantrell. Quote, "We found that some persons who in more normal circumstances might have had critical ability were so overwhelmed by their particular listing situation that their better judgment was suspended. This indicates that a highly consistent structuration of the external stimulus world may at times be experienced with sufficient intensity because of its personal implications to inhibit the operation of usually applicable internal structurations or standards of judgment." Okay, and that is the external stimulus will have a type of personal resonance, right? So you create personal resonance. I guess harking back to the rock, look at people that get so offended or so upset when you critique the rock culture of the 60s, right? Their personal implications of the external stimulus have superseded their own ability to make critical judgment, their critical ability, and their, and the emotional insecurities and anxieties make them subject to suggestion when confronted with a personally dangerous circumstance, end quote. So there's different psychological mechanisms that are being employed, but at the same time, for those that are educated, the implication is that these things are done by accident, right? So even though it appears that this is completely fake, which it is, right? We've pulled this apart, I think, and you can go through all the other documents. This thing was set up. In fact, this was probably the culmination of them coming up with all these metrics of studying behavior, of creating mass markets, of using the voice to induce particular states of consciousness, et cetera, et cetera. All this culminated in one of the bulwarks, so to speak, of our belief in the media and belief in the not only the power but the veracity and all these things. So it's quite interesting if you again tie this in with all these other events and see just how this model has been used and shaped. Even you can look at the types of tones taken by broadcasters during major events, Kennedy assassination, et cetera, et cetera. You can really see that this has been utilized, and it continues to be utilized across the board to such an extent that I just feel that there may be some deeper resonance to it, even with the park. The park is like some kind of weird, Illuminati shrine or something, some kind of MKUltra park that how many people have even gone and ever read those plaques besides you?
Well, yeah, and basically what they're doing is they're rubbing people's noses in it while their children are playing on the playground at the park. I mean, it's a big gag to them. They're just having a big old riot about it.
Yeah. And again, at the same time, and this comes up over and over again. I've repeated it, 50 times at least since we've been doing these interviews, but revelation of the method in that you show the people that, hey, here's what I'm doing, but you're going to choose not to believe that this possibly could be a trick, or this could be, that this particular...
You think it was a conspiracy, and then people will automatically dismiss it, even though you're providing them the information of what you're doing to them.
Yeah, and in fact, by providing to them and them choosing not to look at, choosing to avoid it, they couldn't do that, or choosing...
Our government is here to protect us.
Yeah. I mean, just an example of all these, I mentioned, Son of Sam killings, where all this stuff is coming out in a newspaper, referencing movies that are just coming out, referencing all this stuff. And when the letters are published in the newspapers, that operation is going on, the panic event of the serial killers. I think this ties directly in with all these serial killers and mass killing stuff that came in the 70s, 80s. And notice how these things basically stopped in the age of terror. But these similar type of engineered media events, which give clear clues throughout that, hey, this is a setup and we're tricking you. And because even though you're recognizing it and choosing to reject it or sublimate that, the effect of this is going to be magnified exponentially. And then you yourself become invested in continuing the cover up because you've identified yourself with that external stimulus, right? Just as, you identify yourself as a deadhead, and to find out that what they're doing was this and that, you're going to keep disregarding that, and in fact, it's going to more deeply embed the conditioning stimulus or thing, and then at the same time, it's going to make you more and more open. It's basically opening a door for more of this kind of programming, this kind of mass programming of the collective consciousness. And that's, of course, now that I think they've gone overboard with just every day there's some other event, but it's the exact same model, exact same template with, again, all these pre-programmed fail-safe mechanisms. It's like you drop through one hole and you think you escape, but actually it's going to take you to the next box that's going to bring you right back up where you started, just like helter-skelter, right? You just keep going around in the circle. And
like a MC Escher nightmare painting.
Yeah, exactly. And, it's also, let me just read one other quote, which I think is extremely telling. This is the last thing from Cantrell's paper. Quote, "In short, the extreme behavior evoked by the broadcast was due to the enormous ego involvement the situation created and to the complete inability of the individual to alleviate or control the consequences of the invasion. The coming of the Martians did not present a situation where the individual could preserve one value if he sacrificed another. It was not a matter of saving one country by giving one's life, of helping to usher in a new religion by self-denial, of risking the thief's bullet to save the family's silver. In this situation, the individual stood to lose all values at once." Say it again. In this situation, the individual stood to lose all values at once. Nothing could be done to save any of them. Panic was inescapable. The false standard of judgment used by the individual to interpret the broadcast was not itself the motivational cause of the behavior, but it was absolutely essential in arousing the needs and values which may be regarded as the sources of the actions exhibited. A false standard of judgment aroused by the broadcast and causing the individual to be disturbed had its roots in values which were a part of the ego. Okay, if that made sense, there's a lot in there, but the whole thing. Okay, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say we should probably get back to this last 12 minutes here.
Okay. Oh yeah, go ahead and and roll that.
You ready?
Yep.
All right. I thought you were saying one last thing, but all right, here we go.
There's no food here. This is my country. All this end of town down the river. There's only food for one. Which way are you going?
I don't know. I guess I'm looking for people.
Hey, what was that? Did you hear something just then?
No. Only a bird. A live bird.
Yeah. You get to know that birds have shadows these days.
Say, we're in the open here. Let's crawl in this doorway here and talk.
Have you seen any Martians?
No. They're going over to New York. Night, the sky's alive with their lights, just as if people were still living in it. By daylight, you can't see them. 5 days ago, a couple of them carried something big across the flats from the airport. I think they're learning how to fly.
Fly?
Yeah, fly.
Hmm. Well, it's all over with humanity. Stranger, there's still you and I. 2 of us left.
Yeah. They got themselves in solid. They wrecked the greatest country in the world. Those green stars, they're probably falling somewhere every night. They've only lost 1 machine. There isn't anything to do. We're done. We're licked.
Where were you? You're in a uniform.
Yeah, what's left of it. I was in the militia. National Guard. That's good. There wasn't any war. Any more than there's war between men and ants.
Yes, but we're eatable ants. I found that out. What'll they do to us?
I thought it all out. Right now, we're caught as we're wanted. A Martian only has to go a few miles to get a crowd on the run. But they won't keep on doing that. They'll begin catching us systematic, like keeping the best and storing us in cages and things. They haven't begun on us yet.
Not begun?
Not begun. All that's happened so far is because we don't have sense enough to keep quiet. Bothering them with guns and such stuff and losing our heads and rushing off in crowds. No, instead of our rushing around blind, we got to fix ourselves up. Fix ourselves up according to the way things are now. Cities, nations, civilization, progress.
Yes, but if that's so, what is there to live for?
Well, there won't be any more concerts for 1,000,000 years or so and no nice little dinners at restaurants. If it's amusement you're after, I guess the game's up.
What is there left?
Life, that's what. I want to live. Yeah, and so do you. We're not going to be exterminated. And I don't mean to be caught either. Tamed and fattened and bred like an ox.
What are you going to do?
I'm going on. Right under their feet. I got a plan. We men as men, we're finished. We don't know enough. We got to learn plenty before we got a chance. We've got to live and keep free while we learn, see? I've thought it all out, see?
Well, tell me the rest.
Well, it isn't all of us that are made for wild beasts. That's what it got to. That's what it got to be. That's why I watched you. Watched you. All those little office workers that used to live in these houses. They be no good. They haven't any stuff in them. They used to run off to work. I've seen hundreds of them running to catch their commuter's train in the morning, afraid they'd get canned if they didn't. Running back at night, afraid they wouldn't be in time for dinner. Lives insured and a little invested in case of accidents. Yeah, and on Sundays, worried about the hereafter. Well, the Martians, they'll be a godsend for those guys. Nice, roomy cages, good food, careful breeding, no worries. Yeah, after a week or so of chasing around the fields on empty stomachs, they'll come and be glad to be caught.
You've thought it all out, haven't you?
Sure, you bet I have. That isn't all. These Martians are going to make pets of some of them. Train them to do tricks. Who knows, get sentimental over the pet boy who grew up and had to be killed. Yeah, and some maybe, they'll train to hunt us.
Oh, no, it's impossible. Human
Yes,
beings.
they will. There's men who do it gladly. If one of them ever comes after me, by...
In the meantime, you and I and others like us, where are we to live when the Martians own the Earth?
I got it all figured out. We'll live underground. I've been thinking about the sewers. Under New York, there are miles and miles of them. The main ones, they're big enough for anybody. Then there's cellars, vaults, underground storerooms, railway tunnels, subways. You begin to see, huh? We'll get a bunch of strong men together. No weaklings. That rubbish, out.
As you meant me to go.
All right. Give you a chance, didn't I?
Won't quarrel about that. Go on.
Well, we got to make safe places for us to stay in, see? Get all the books we can. Science books. That's where men like you come in, see? We raid the museums. We'll even spy on the Martians. May not be so much we have to learn before... Listen. Just imagine this.
4 or 5 of their own fighting machines suddenly start off. Heat rays right and left. Not a Martian in them. Not a Martian in them, see? But men. Men who've learned the way how. May even be in our time. Gee. Imagine having one of them lovely things with its heat ray wide and free. We'd turn it on Martians. We'd turn it on men. We'd bring everybody down on their knees.
That's your plan.
Yeah. You, me, a few more of us. We'd own the world.
I see.
Hey. Hey, what's the matter? Where are you going?
Not to your world. Bye, stranger. Well, after parting with the artilleryman, I came at last to the Holland Tunnel, entered that silent tube, anxious to know the fate of the great city on the other side of the Hudson. Cautiously, I came out of the tunnel and made my way up Canal Street. Reached 14th Street, and there again were black powder and several bodies and an evil, ominous smell from the gratings of the cellars of some of the houses. I wandered up through the 30s and 40s, stood alone on Times Square, caught sight of a lean dog running down 7th Avenue with a piece of dark brown meat in his jaws and a pack of starving mongrels at his heels. Made a wide circle around me as though he feared I might prove a fresh competitor. Walked up Broadway in the direction of that strange powder, past silent shop windows, displaying their mute wares to empty sidewalks. Past the Capitol Theater, silent, dark. Past a shooting gallery where a row of empty guns faced an arrested line of wooden ducks. Near Columbus Circle, I noticed models of 1939 motor cars in the showrooms facing empty streets. Over the top of the General Motors building, I watched a flock of black birds circling in the sky. Hurried on. Suddenly, I caught sight of the hood of a Martian machine, standing somewhere in Central Park, gleaming in the late afternoon sun. An insane idea. I rushed recklessly across Columbus Circle and into the park. I climbed a small hill above the pond at 60th Street, and from there I could see standing in a silent row along the mall 19 of those great metal titans, their cowls empty, their steel arms hanging listlessly by their sides. I looked in vain for the monsters that inhabit those machines. Suddenly, my eyes were attracted to the immense flock of black birds that hovered directly below me. They circled to the ground. And there before my eyes, stark and silent, lay the Martians with the hungry birds pecking and tearing brown shreds of flesh from their dead bodies. Later, when their bodies were examined in laboratories, it was found that they were killed by the putrefactive and disease bacteria against which their systems were unprepared. Slain, after all, man's defenses had failed by the humblest thing that God, His wisdom, has put upon this earth. Before the cylinder fell, there was a general persuasion that through all the deep of space, no life existed beyond the petty surface of our minute sphere. Now we see further. Dim and wonderful is the vision I've conjured up in my mind of life spreading slowly from this little seedbed of the solar system throughout the inanimate vastnesses of sidereal space. But a remote dream, maybe that the destruction of the Martians is only a reprieve to them and not to us. Is the future ordained, perhaps? Strange it now seems to sit in my peaceful study at Princeton, writing down this last chapter of the record, begun at a deserted farm in Grover's Mill. Strange to watch children playing in the streets. Strange to see young people strolling on the green where the new spring grass heals the last black scars of a bruised earth. Strange to watch the sightseers enter the museum where the dissembled parts of a Martian machine are kept on public view. Strange when I recall the time when I first saw it. Bright and clean-cut, hard and silent under the dawn of that last great day. This is Orson Welles, ladies and gentlemen. Out of character, to assure you that the War of the Worlds has no further significance than as the holiday offering it was intended to be. The Mercury Theater's own radio version of dressing up in a sheet and jumping out of a bush and saying boo. Starting now, we couldn't soap all your windows and steal all your garden gates. By tomorrow night, so we did the best next thing. We annihilated the world before your very ears and utterly destroyed the CBS. You will be relieved, I hope, to learn that we didn't mean it, and that both institutions are still open for business. So goodbye, everybody, and remember, please, for the next day or so, the terrible lesson you learned tonight. That grinning, glowing, globular invader of your living room is an inhabitant of the pumpkin patch, and if your doorbell rings and nobody's there, that was no Martian, it's Halloween.
Tonight, the Columbia Broadcasting System and its affiliated stations coast to coast has brought you The War of the World by H.G. Wells, the 17th in its weekly series of dramatic broadcasts featuring Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater on the air. Next week, we present a dramatization of 3 famous short stories. This is the Columbia Broadcasting System.
Anyway, yeah, wow. So, obviously it wasn't meant just to scare them and jump out of the bushes and go boo. Obviously they planned this long in advance, has studied it for 77 years since, have repeated it continually, have based modern media propaganda, manipulation, scare and panic tactics against the public from this original Princeton University mind control psychological warfare study.
Yes. And I do think that some of the lessons from this are quite profound. One of them being that the ego involvement of the individual, the sense of helplessness, the destruction of values, and the fact that the panic is an emotion that has absolutely no useful effect whatsoever. But this destruction of social connections based on this egoidity and the identification of the victim, you could say it's a Stockholm syndrome writ large, is really kind of fundamental. You even see a lot of the alternative media creates this sense of basically despair. There's this huge overarching impenetrable network of shadowy figures that are manipulating every single aspect of your life. And there's really nothing you can do that's going to have a real consequence. And you can see this. And let me just read one more quote from Cantrell. A panic occurs when some highly cherished, rather commonly accepted value is threatened, and when no certain elimination of the threat is in sight. The individual feels that he'll be ruined physically, financially, or socially, end quote. But when a commonly accepted value is threatened, so look at all the cultural upheavals of the 1960s, from feminism to the hippie movement to rock. These are examples of inducing panics, threatening social values, and also creating the continued growth of sort of the artificially media constructed self or ego that is more and more socially isolated, more and more given to complete disregard of their connection with the world, at the same time given to disregard the fact that we have so much power to make differences, and you tune things out. So I think that really, truly, it was a very successful and powerful study. And, certainly I enjoy he's back at Princeton, just in case we forgot, writing it down. So it is a bit funny in the way that they did that. But you can imagine at the time, the way they're intercutting broadcasts, no one did that before. So you can see that would have been pretty disrupting for people, especially for people that didn't have the critical judgment to understand that, hey, the Martians weren't there, but go ahead and shoot a water tower. All right.
Yeah, well, at least that's what we're told. I didn't see any. I mean, as far as I could get up close to the water tower, I didn't see any bullet holes or anything in the damn thing. And I should point out here before we wrap this up that H.G. Wells' book, The War of the Worlds, was published in 1898. The broadcast was in 1938. I wonder if H.G. Wells, who again was Henry Huxley's student, I wonder if he published that originally on October 30th, 1898 as well. So anyway, did you have anything else you want to add before we release everyone from this Halloween or Hallows Eve presentation of undoing this 77-year-old spell against the public?
Yeah. Well, it really kind of is a spell, right? It is certainly an induction. It has, and I won't get into, there's all kinds of numerological things, all kinds of symbolic things within that are quite interesting. But like Lazarsfeld, he was with the Macy Project, and they worked on feedback mechanisms and circular causal control systems in biological and social systems, one of the early Macy conferences. So you're looking at this as a social system and, the system dynamics. They're using system dynamics to create their own manipulable and docile public, at the same time saying, hey, you're just like little, belittling the human race, saying we're just insignificant speck of dust and like little organisms breeding in water. So, I hope that, everyone will take away the fact that these techniques, once if it's not broken, don't fix it, right? It took a long time, I think, to develop some of these methodologies, but the one thing is that given the vastness of the system, it takes a long time to change. So if you start seeing this all around you, and it reminds me of like I don't know, one of those fairy tales where the whole town has been put to sleep, and they don't even know that they're asleep. And that's kind of, to me, what the War of the Worlds is a little bit.
Absolutely. And then that goes, obviously, Paul Lazarsfeld's relationship to the Macy conferences and the Macy Foundation. Of course, the Macy conferences were entirely funded, backed by the CIA, and that is a key factor of what became and what was the CIA's MKULTRA, or Mind Control Ultra program.
Yep, and you got Bateson, Margaret Mead, all the other people there, and it takes a long time to develop these particular theories. But the fact is that if you're willing to do the research, I think they're pretty proud of their work, and I think they're willing to rub it right in your face. So I think that's
right.
Well,
and it's a bit entertaining. And now it's time for us to rub their noses in their own shit. So
exactly. But excellent, Jan. And we'll go out and have fun trick-or-treating. Go eat some GMO chocolate and
all right. And thanks so much. And everyone, that's a wrap. Thanks, Hans. And until next time, we'll see you then.
Take care.